Thank you so much. At this point, I'm going to invite all our speakers up to the stage, and with the amount of time that we have left, to have some questions and answers. And while they're coming up, please go ahead.
Can somebody grab my water?
Can you get her water?
Can ask Clyde to bring my water up? Maybe he is.
While they're coming up, I just want to say, if you didn't have a sense of the complexities and the depth of the issues before, then you certainly do now. Maili'i, Uncle Mel Kalahiki, used to say, well, you got to do something about the heva. Heva is the opposite of pono. Heva is the wrong. He says, first you got to deal with the heva, the wrong that was done to Hawaii, and you got to go from there. So that is why this is ikapono, towards what is right. It's not easy, and there's a lot to work with. Now, there's a microphone there for questions to be asked from the audience. Are you waiting to ask a question? Step right up. Where's we missing? Where's Dr. Chang? Well, go ahead, please.
Aloha mai kākou o vau o Mele Kananio Kala Hollinger o hano io ma waheoa o ahu. I have a question for all of the panelists. I actually have two questions. One.
You only get one, sorry.
Oh. Okay. Right. So considering the importance of a lahui and the importance of having everyone contribute to a lahui, what checks and balances are we going to be able to put in place for powerful Hawaiian interests such as Kamehameha schools? Is there any way we can sort of control some of the damage that they're doing in the name of capitalism and profit?
I'm not sure what the question is, though. Could you try repeating it one more time?
So, large groups that represent the Hawaiian people oftentimes will do things that are sort of counter to what many think are the interests of the Hawaiian people. The example being Kamehameha schools testifying in favor of some of the harsher homelessness laws in Honolulu and the fines against homeless, largely Hawaiian populations. Is there any way that the people can sort of step in and say that's not necessarily pono?
Sure. Let me take the first step, and others might have a, and I've worked closely with Kamehameha as well. And I agree with your premise, which is that there probably is more abuse than we would like. I know that when I was the CEO at OHA, we got a request because the law requires that a certain amount of units be declared as affordable. And what Kamehameha was proposing was that the affordable units be transferred to Waianae, that units that are constructed in Waianae would satisfy the affordable unit requirements for condominiums that were built in Kaka'ako. And you know, my comments to our trustees was that that's called social engineering, and really, you know, that's not something that OHA, that really has the legal responsibility to look out for the betterment of Native Hawaiians, should endorse. So I guess your question, which is a really, really good one, and an observation that I've had, there's a little bit too much complicity to a lot of what is going on. And if you come to Hawaii and you look at the number of construction projects in Kaka'ako, I would suggest that half of those are projects being developed by Kamehameha. But you didn't hear it from me.
They're live streaming this, I think, so somebody's hearing it.
Wow.
Kamehameha schools in the Bishop Estate are in control. They're the largest private landowner in Hawaii. And so they have they have historically had a potentially great impact on the economy, first of the territory and the state. But it's really not until the 1960s and 1970s that you see it really exercising this. So they're a major player. And people like me who are alumnus have complained about Kamehameha's use of its resources, about the deployment of their resources, and about whether or not they've really actually seek the welfare of really their sole beneficiaries, Native Hawaiian children and those people who are being educated. But it's a powerful institution, and we have seen this sort of thing go on over and over and over again. They act like a big business, and it's a really good reason for, not just for Kanaka Maoli, but for people in a society like ours to question and to do something about the kind of power that large, well-financed corporations have.
Thank you for mentioning that, because I was asking as a recent alum of Kamehameha Schools, actually. I graduated in 2011 from Kamehameha, so that's why I wanted to ask.
I have one more follow-up comment, and it's more practical. There is one vacancy for Kamehameha School trustee. Trustee Oles stepped down, and there's going to be two vacancies because Trustee Kalama, I think, has maxed out. So he'll be gone. So of the 5-member board, there will be 2 vacancies that will be advertised, because what they have is a advisory group that screens the applicants. And if you subscribe to the Star Advertiser, when those notices are put out, people need to really weigh in, because I don't think that happens enough. I don't think people really offer comments. You know, the type of folks that are being selected, just take a look. And I know them all, and you know, I am probably friends with them all, but there's a real development bent to the trustees that have been selected recently. And that's because you don't get a lot of people saying, wait, you know, let's look more carefully at the people that are being selected.
Hello. Hi. I'm also a Kamehameha alumnus, and I was just a few years out of school when I joined with the protesters at Kalama Valley, which was a Kamehameha Schools development. And you know, it just felt, at least at that time, that they were not heedful of, to me, a larger mission to educate our children, but were willing to, in my opinion, resort to less than honorable means in order to maximize revenue to the trust. You know, in those years and in the years when our Lahui actually took the streets and protested on another occasion and effectively removed all of the trustees, it just feels as though there are times when when Kamehameha is ready for correction. And, you know, of course, I mean, I'm bringing to this kind of a community activist perspective, but it feels as though they go along their merry way and then something really drastic happens and then they get checked. My understanding is that they had a community advisory kind of regimen where they would be able to hear from the people, but I'm not sure how effective that is. You know, if you have issues with their policies and practices, I would absolutely, well, if you do it in a more organized way, it's more effective, I think, because it's a monolithic institution and it's very slow to react or adjust to community.
Thank you.
Well, isn't the problem that the Bishop Estate is not any different from General Motors or Pfizer? It's a corporation under an American government. The American government gives it tax benefits, charitable benefits, and what needs to happen is the trust needs to be reminded of why the elite retained trust lands in the first place. They were substitutes for various branches of government, like Pauahi was education, Liliuokalani was children, Lunalilo was elderly, Emma was medical. And they're absolutely acting in the opposite way. And the only way to control that and to steer them back to their original position in society is to replace the government that sits over them and forces them in a way to compete as if they were private corporate multinationals.
I'm going to stop this one there because by my clock we have 5 minutes left for questions and answers. So, next question, please.
Yes, from the taking of Hawaii to the attempt by TransCanada to take over the Oglala Aquifer to put in the Keystone XL pipeline to the degradation of the water in Flint, Michigan, all of these issues are connected worldwide. And they all stem, it seems to me, from the power of the few versus the sovereignty of the many. Could you address the degree to which you all are affiliated with or seek counsel with other indigenous organizations, other indigenous forums around the world?
I think that it's likely that everybody here on this panel has at one time or another been involved in conversations with and in solidarity with indigenous peoples, not just on this continent, but in the Pacific and other parts of the world. I think we see our aims and our destinies and our fate very much linked because people of the land really are, as I think Mahilani put it so eloquently, really, really vulnerable to that kind of exploitation that comes sort of second nature to big companies and big governments who support big companies. So, I mean, behind all of these native movements are really, really, really considerable ideals that say we have to live differently and that we're way past the time when you could easily make those changes. Yes, we are in companionship and actually sometimes leading some of those discussions.
I would like to say that, though, as the problems get more acute, many of our communities have adopted a sort of a siege mentality where they, surround the wagons and fight anybody who tries anything. It's just, it's almost like reverting to a survival mode, simply because it's so chaotic, they're so overwhelmed, so anybody comes in and tries to do anything. For example, the television cable guy wanted to lay ocean cable through their fishing grounds. And what happened is that the so-called posse showed up, which is all these farmers on ATVs, drove down over there and destroyed the truck. And it's not a good thing. I mean, you don't want violence, you don't want people getting hurt, and our farmers are very, very important. We need our farmers. But they feel so overwhelmed and overrun. They're so, I'm sensing that, unless there's some middle ground and there's some remediation of this problem, that this idea of we need to protect what we have at any cost is just going to get worse.
Thank you. Next question.
Aloha mai kākou. I'm from the Big Island of Hawaii, Moko Keawe. My name is Kalaula Trask. That's my ohana. So the Trask ohana is my ohana. So I know we don't always get along in the same discussion plane. We definitely have some differing views between communities. But my question is towards the philosophy of Aloha Aina and what that philosophy actually has in this nationhood building process, right? How are we going to use our Ike Kupuna, our Aloha Aina Kupuna that's grounded in our being to go forward at that nationhood building process? So it's not just, the process of pushing papers and, getting those things done. How do we actually change the philosophy of our way of being so that we are living Aloha Aina?
Well, when you said that, it just reminded me, my husband is a taro farmer, and he will never go into the lo'i unless he's Pono. So if he has any feelings whatsoever of negative or animosity, anything like that, even if the lo'i, and he's very faithful, he's there every day, needs a lot of work, but he will not go. He'll discipline himself and reflect until that is gone. He'll pono himself. That kind of approach is prevalent, not only in him, but in the people that reside, who live there. They all do that. They all understand. If you go over there and you try and plant or you try and work the aina and you bring heva, you bring bad vibes, it's not going to, you will not get a good result. So I believe that, as we gather together at Lahui, that our people, our Ko'aina will be there. They will be represented. They're very, very interested and concerned. And they're not going to be sort of swallowed up by everybody. I think that point of view is very much respected, because that's what those kinds of ways of regarding our place here on earth is what informs us as Kanaka. It's just so fundamental, and I believe in it, and I know that there are many who also believe in it.
Thank you. Next question.
I must say that I'm from a different part of the world. I'm from the Caribbean. So this discussion has been quite interesting to me, in the sense that a lot of what I heard in an even more extreme fashion is really playing out in the Caribbean at this point in time. Total loss of control, total colonialism, total touristic economy, total cultural and intellectual confusion that we have there. So I want to ask just a few foundational questions here, and they're based on my simple knowledge of intimate knowledge of what is going on there. The discussion about Hawaiian nationalism, right? In a society where seemingly, as is the case in where I'm from, St. Martin or Aruba, where the original inhabitants are a very minor presence now in a society that's being overrun by people coming from all over. What does that Hawaiian nationalism do? That kind of indigenous, independent Hawaiian nationalism do at this point in time to reach out to the other groups that have become part of the society? Are they becoming part of this Hawaiian nationalism? Are they starting to partake in this Hawaiian nationalism? Are parts of those communities starting to do so? Or is this indigenous Hawaiian nationalism facing a kind of rejection from that overwhelming, basically, majority that makes up the society now? So maybe some of you can tell me about it and tell me if there's some type of reaching out, if some type of new development taking place in transforming Hawaiian nationalism to include a larger majority of those new people.
I'm going to answer that because it's something that I have been very, very devoted to. I try to speak to as many different kinds of groups about the possibilities and the rightness of independence from the United States. And it's important to speak to non-Kanaka Maoli groups, because my own feeling about longtime residents of Hawaii, particularly longtime Asian residents, Japanese, Chinese, people who have been there many generations, they're not opposed to Hawaiians getting some sense of justice. Many of them, in fact, back in the 1993, 1994, Advertiser was doing a series of polls, and there was a large majority of people, residents in Hawaii, who favored some kind of Hawaiian self-government. That's not what they're worried about. They're afraid of dispossession. They're afraid of being dispossessed, not just of businesses, but of the right to vote. They say, what happens to us? And those are actually only questions that can be asked and answered by constant engagement. And that's what is missing, really, from all this preparation, from federal recognition into Kana'i'oluwalu and Na'iaupuni, is that there has been no real outreach to them. Where is that? Where's the community education that gets people to understand, what national rights are in the 21st century? What decolonization means, what restoration of independent government means. So it is a serious issue. It's something that absolutely has to be done, but it's also something that when you do it, actually provides more and more clarity about what it is people are working for.
Well said. We're supposed to be over, but I'm going to keep this going until they tell me to actually stop. But please try to keep your questions brief.
Very brief. Today, how would you define a native Hawaiian?
I think there are numerous legal definitions. And you can look, through the Hawaii Revised Statutes. If you want to be a homesteader, you need to be 50%. You need to establish that. For other statutes and for federal laws especially, you trace yourself back to the first white people that came to Hawaii. So those are the legal definitions. I can sense by your question that perhaps you're asking something beyond legal definitions. Is that your question?
That's correct, because the first part of a unification of a people, you have to have a common consensus on what the definition is. By the way, my name's Kalani and I'm from Kauai, so.
Yeah. Sorry, we agree with you, I think.
Yeah.
You have to have
Yeah.
a common consensus, yeah.
Good answer.
I lived in Hawaii over 40 years ago for only 4 months. When I entered Hawaii, I really had the Hollywood version of Hawaii in my head. And I lived in Waikiki and was dealing with tourists. But after 4 months of living there, I did a lot of reading, a lot of talking with people, a lot of walking around, seeing the islands. I came to the conclusion on my own that Hawaii should be an independent country. It wasn't because I saw Hawaii as being anti-American. It was just, it had its own culture, its own language, its own geography, its own wonderful everything. And that was my conclusion. I want to thank you all today, because in a sense what we've seen today is, in a sense, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in which the facts, the crimes of the past, the true history of the past has been brought forward to us here in Washington. And I think you've done a tremendous service, because the only way we can go into the future and deal with the present is to actually accept and understand the past, because that tells us where we are at the present time. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. Should we take one? One more.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Jeanette Soonliris. My ohana is from Kailua, Kaneohe, and Kualoa. I'm a doctoral candidate actually at the University of Maryland. But enough about that. I actually wanted to ask my shorter question now. Maybe I'll grab some of you after. But Dr. Osorio, you had said something about the neocon Supreme Court ruling, and I've honestly, like, my knee-jerk reaction, okay, I'm gonna kind of out where I stand politically with Nai Aupuni, but my knee-jerk reaction was like, yeah! But then I read it, and I'm just sort of like, I don't know how I feel about that. So I was wondering if you could kind of tell us a little bit more about what's going on with that case, and maybe why the knee-jerk reaction is like, yeah, we're throwing a wrench in this, but that maybe it's not that great.
You're talking about the recent U.S. Supreme Court?
The Supreme Court decision to halt the election.
What I can tell you about this is that the suit was originally brought by essentially the same people who have been going after Native Hawaiian entitlements, including the existence of OHA and DHHL and all these people. I mean, it's based on the similar kinds of arguments as Rice versus Cayetano. These people should not have a right to conduct a separate election. And from the very beginning, all of us, even those of us who oppose Kanai'oluwalu, we were very, very much opposed to this suit as well, for the same reason that we've always opposed those kinds of suits in the past. The real problem with that suit is that it assumes that we are all equal Americans in Hawaii. And if there's one thing that I think all of us agree on here, is it's not that way. And there may be a range of opinion about us here on this stage, but I think we all believe that Hawaiians are different, that the Hawaiian people are different, that our history and the history of our political relationship with the United States has been complicated by the United States, not by anything we did. So we do not support, I did not support, and many of the people I know did not support the halting of this process by the US Supreme Court. Our belief was, what are you doing here? This is an internal matter.
So let me explain, because the Royal Commission was a party in the lawsuit, so I had to testify in court. Judge Seabright ruled, and the action that the parties were asking for was a restraining order to stop the election. Judge Seabright denied the request for a restraining order. What's on appeal to the Ninth Circuit is Judge Seabright's ruling. Judge Seabright said no, there wasn't enough evidence to warrant the issuance of a restraining order against the election. So the election, in Judge Seabright's mind, could go on. So the appeal went up to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit has not yet ruled on Judge Seabright's ruling. The plaintiffs in the case filed their appeal to the Ninth Circuit, but there is a procedure that allows them to file a request of the US Supreme Court, which is what they did. And Justice Kennedy issued the order that stopped the counting of the ballots. So that's really there. So the substance of the case is not the matter that's on appeal. The matter on appeal is Judge Seabright's restraining order. That's the matter that is on appeal. And the Ninth Circuit, we have documents that are due next week. So it's very likely that the Ninth Circuit will issue a ruling maybe by the middle of February. But even after the Ninth Circuit issues a ruling, the plaintiffs may still request an en banc ruling where all the members of the court would have to rule on this restraining order issue. It's actually very unusual for the US Supreme Court to rule on a procedural matter. But Justice Kennedy, as I'm sure Professor Chang will remember, was one of the justices that ruled on the Rice case. And he issued, he did a dissent on or not a dissent, but he wrote I think the majority opinion in the Rice case. So Justice Kennedy is the one who actually issued the order that stopped the counting of the ballots. And that's what's being restrained. The election was completed, but they can't count the ballots.
And speaking of stopping, I've been given the signal that we have to stop right now. Okay. No, that was good. And I just want to wrap up. I want to wrap up by saying, Mahealani, I think, said it best. What we're really dealing with here is two different sets of values. And one is the value of selfishness, which is the base value, and the other is the value of doing what's pono. And when you go to Hawaii and you encounter the situation there, you either get it or you don't. And we have seen so much damage and destruction done in the name of selfishness and a sense of entitlement that comes with being American. We're all equal, private property, we can do what we want, we have freedom. We've just had these militia people up in Oregon, saying that they're fighting for freedom to get the land back for themselves that was stolen from American Indians. None of it makes sense. So, so it challenges us. The case of Hawaii for Americans is a real challenge to, well, what really is right? What kind of situation, what kind of society do we really want to live in? And as I've said at the beginning, as the earth gets more crowded, as climate change and other issues push on us harder and harder, we have to really reconsider, well, can I just do what I want wherever I want? Is that right? Or do we all have to live in this together and figure out how we're going to do that? So I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And thank you all for being a wonderful audience. Safe travels.